The number one issue for Latinos is immigration reform because of their personal experiences. You know, they've had exactly the same hassles and problems that my household has had in dealing with the immigration agency, which is an agency that's completely broken, it's inefficient, it doesn't work, they lose paper, it's very expensive. I mean, the list can go on and on. So we're seeing the changed political environment just because of the need that each party has to address that issue. The areas where the two parties, I believe, are going to be in agreement is on the importance of border security. Everybody is concerned about the number of illegal people who cross the border from Mexico into the United States. Right now, we are at a 30-year low in the number of people crossing the border. If you go back, the Border Patrol has been keeping statistics on this for over 40 years now. If you go back to the 1980s, about 1.7 million illegals cross that border in any given year. Now that number has dropped down to about 325,000. So, you know, it's still a big number, but we can start to see the investment that the United States has made in dramatically increasing the number of Border Patrol agents, building the fence, kind of taking security more seriously. We have 5 drones that fly over the border, so there's electronic surveillance. So on all those things, we have done a much better job. Politicians in Washington don't talk so much about the progress that we've made, but we actually have made progress. So there is agreement there. Where the disagreement is coming is on that pathway to citizenship, because we still have about 11 million people who are in the United States illegally. Half of them basically crossed the border illegally from Mexico, but the other half are people who actually came to the United States legally, like through a student visa or a tourism visa or some other visa, and then when their visa ran out, they stayed here, which turned them into an illegal category. And so the question is, what do you do about those 11 million people? You know, some people would want to deport them, but that's not practical given the large numbers. And also, these people are actually doing a lot of jobs that Americans won't do. There are several southern states, Georgia among others, that have adopted very draconian laws restricting the use of illegal employees in the workplace. And what has happened in those areas is people in the restaurant business, the hotel business, and in agriculture are now complaining because they can't find the workers. They're not able to use the illegals who are here, but then they can't find Americans who want to do those jobs. So deportation is not really an option, and nobody is seriously entertaining that option in DC. But there are several variations in terms of how people want to do it. And this will be the thing to watch as Congress starts to write the legislation. President Obama came out with the most embracing strategy in the sense that he basically said, what we need to do with the 11 million people who are here illegally is set up a pathway to citizenship where people have to meet 3 different conditions. They have to learn English, they have to pay back taxes that they owe, and they have to pass a criminal background check. If they meet all those conditions, we will put them in the queue. It doesn't mean they get citizenship tomorrow or next year or even 5 years from now. It's likely to be a 15-year process before all of those 11 million people are able to go through and become a citizen. So it's going to be a long process, and there are going to be a lot of conditions attached, but at some point, they will reach the point where they are able to become U.S. citizens. So that's the Obama approach. The 8 senators who came out 2 weeks ago with their own bipartisan plan, and that included Senator McCain, they support a pathway to citizenship, but they want to attach what they call a border security trigger. Meaning, before anybody among those 11 million people can become U.S. citizens, we have to meet certain benchmarks on border security in terms of the United States taking a serious effort to guard against those coming here illegally, that we have to do a good job in terms of border security. We have to keep that number of inflow down to a reasonable level, and only if we meet that border security threshold, then at that point those people can start on that pathway to citizenship and eventually become citizens. House Republicans last week came out with their own version, and as a sign of how the politics have changed, for the first time, Eric Cantor, who's the number 2 guy after Boehner among House Republicans, came out in favor of the DREAM Act, which basically allows the children of people who are here illegally, who arrived here after they were born, to actually become U.S. citizens and to be able to stay here. So they're supporting a pathway to citizenship for young people under the age of 18, but then not for anyone over the age. So you can see across those 3 different groupings, the Obama plan, the Senate plan, and now the House Republican plan, that there remain significant differences, but everybody has shifted. Everybody understands that there's going to be some type of legislation that comes out of this. There's still going to be some differences. I think the most likely thing to anticipate coming out of Congress is the Senate is likely to pass a bill, probably on a big margin. It'll be bipartisan, somewhere between 60 and 70 votes in favor of the final legislation, and it'll look something pretty close to the McCain plan that I just described. Then it'll go to the House. There, I think it's going to be difficult for many House Republicans to support a pathway to citizenship among most of those 11 million people. So I would anticipate that most House Republicans will end up voting no on that legislation, but the bill is likely to pass if all the Democrats support it, and there are at least 30 House Republicans who support it. That was the recipe on New Year's Day to pass the fiscal cliff legislation. That was exactly the type of vote that we had there. That's likely to be the case on immigration reform. The last issue I want to address is the gun issue. And here, I will be surprised if much happens. I don't think Congress is going to be able to come to an agreement on that. It's an issue that sharply divides many people among the American public, and probably many people here in this room. That it's an issue where there are several different aspects of it. The area where we're likely to have the biggest agreement, and if there's legislation, it would probably center on this, is improving our background checks on those who are purchasing certain types of weapons. This is an area where most Democrats and even a number of Republicans agree that we need to do a better job checking the backgrounds there, just to make sure that criminals are not being able to buy guns, people with documented mental illness of differing forms are able to get the guns. So there will be some agreement there. But the rest of the package, an assault weapons ban, and imposing different types of restrictions there is going to be very difficult. The interesting thing is when you compare the immigration issue on the one hand to the gun issue on the other, we've already seen a number of leading Republicans even in the House, come out in favor of certain types of reforms of the immigration system. But on the gun issue, we have not seen many Republicans come out in favor of that. In fact, it's the opposite. They basically have said, we're not interested in this. We're not going to impose an assault weapons ban. They prefer to have changes in the education system, better background checks, cracking down on Hollywood video game producers who market a lot of violent games. So they're kind of locating the source of the problem, not with guns, but with the broader culture that sometimes encourages that type of violence. So I think it's interesting when you look at the national political situation, how some things have changed, and so we're going to see Congress adopting some legislation, but other areas where there's going to continue to be polarization, hyperpartisanship, and a lot of gridlock. I think each party kind of took certain lessons from the 2012 elections, and where Republicans have shifted, it's because they feel they have to make the change. That in the case of immigration, they have to undertake some steps to kind of capture or recapture some of that Latino vote, because they recognize going forward into 2016 and into 2020 that if Republicans are getting less than 40% of the Latino vote, they are not likely to be able to win the presidential campaign. So that is a message that they find very sobering and is motivating some of the changes that they are making. Why don't I stop at this point? I'd be happy to take any questions or any comments that you have. If you want to argue, as Pat and Brian were pointing out, I taught political science for 26 years. I'm used to arguing with students. I have no problems with that. So feel free to ask whatever you would like. Thank you.
The first question?
Sure.
So, last week we also had a wonderful forum here, and one of the topics that came up was the public's view of government, in particular Congress. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you see any optimism out there about that would lead us to believe that Congress's problem or PR problem as an institution might get better?
Well, it's hard to put the words Congress and optimism in the same sentence and do so with a straight face. But actually, when you look historically at the problems that currently bedevil Congress, the polarization, the partisanship, and the gridlock, when you look historically, those things tend to be cyclical. Certainly in the 1790s was a very partisan and polarized period. The 1890s was the same, and then the 1990s and continuing up to the current period, we saw exactly the same thing. There was a lot of hand-wringing in each of those time periods where people said, hey, we're just fed up with our national political government, things aren't working out the way we wanted, we should be able to do a better job. Eventually it gets to the point where people get fed up with it and things start to change. I think we're kind of at that point now where there's starting to be some changes. You're starting to see members of Congress who are willing to work across the party aisles, even if it's in a begrudging manner or even if it's politically motivated. They're starting to think about the compromises and the bargaining and the negotiation that we need to resolve some of these issues. So on that basis, I think there is reason to be a little more optimistic. But the American public is very bottom line oriented in how it evaluates both members of Congress as well as the presidency. It's like, when things are bad, people are upset. They're angry, they're hostile, and they express their displeasure. And we've seen that over the last 4 years. But as the national economy starts to continue, as we start to address some of the policy problems that sometimes have been 20, 25, or 30 years in the making, the public will respond. So I'm not going to predict that Congress is ever going to become wildly popular. That's never going to happen. But like right now, they've had an approval rating as low as about 9%. And people in Washington say, well, that just includes people who work in Congress and their relatives. You can get to 9% basically through the combination of friends, family members, and people who are on the payroll. But we should be able to do better than that. And I think if the national economy does recover in the manner that we anticipate over the next 2 years, then they will get some public benefit over the fact that they've done a better job than what they have done over the last few years. Other questions? Right here.
I'm interested in sort of the interface between our electoral institutions and the appointed arm of government, specifically the bureaucracy. And I'm thinking about the two sort of policy arenas that you pointed out, one being gun control and the other being immigration. And I'm wondering if you perceive, or people on the ground perceive, that the directions for the bureaucracy coming from one of those policy arenas is any more clear than the other. Or generally are we asking our bureaucrats to do a lot with not very much direction?
I can answer that most clearly on the immigration side, because the way we handle immigration from an administrative standpoint is crazy. For example, most people don't understand that the immigration agency gets very little in the way of federal tax dollars. Like, you know, it's a federal agency, so we just assume it's like every other agency, you know, it gets funded and has the resources it needs to do the job that it needs to do. It does not get federal taxpayer dollar. Instead, that agency is financed by user charges. Like people like me and my wife, when we're applying for the green card, when we're going through the citizenship process, every piece of paper that we file with the agency, they charge you. And it adds up to thousands of dollars to go through the process.